The root cellars of my youth. Uncle Bud's house was up the road from Nanny and Poppy's. It was on top of a hill. And kind of close to the slope of the hill where it really got going was the root cellar. It slanted doors, and under those was a concrete stairway that led down inside of the root cellar. And on the sides there were these wooden boarded shelves, and they were all filled with canned goods. And by canned goods, I mean glass mason jars. It was called canning. It's a strange term for brass lids on glass jars, but for whatever reason, that's the way it was. And it was something people did to save vegetables that grew so well during the summer, so that they could eat them all through the winter. So there were vegetables, canned fruit up there. There were jellies, jams, preserves, chow chow. This is stuff you put on top of green peas, for instance. There were pickled onions and pickled carrots, pickled pickles. Cucumbers are strange that way. My nanny's cucumbers, or her pickles, that is, I didn't really like them as a kid. I liked them enough to eat them, but I liked the other things better. The peppers, the onions, the carrots. But I guess I preferred Vlasic as far as pickles go. I didn't have that sophisticated of a palate for pickles. Nanny made them in a big trash can, by the way. She made a lot of pickles, a lot of cucumbers. So there were shelves on the side, full of potatoes and other root vegetables, just sitting there. Sweet potatoes, regular potatoes, baby potatoes, finger potatoes, all kind of potatoes. We never stole any of the potatoes, but we did like those pickles, especially the peppers and the carrots and the onions and the jellies and the jams. That was stuff that was worth risking your neck for. It was dangerous to take stuff from the root cellar. It was Bud, his wife Nedra, daughter Marie. They'd get a switch after you if they caught you. We were all scared of Bud. I've mentioned him in other stories. He's the one that used to threaten to cut our balls off with his pocket knife if we bothered him during the day. This was still the age of time when boys were not really allowed to stay around the house during the day. If you weren't off doing work, you better be off playing or entertaining yourself somewhere outside, but not the house. That root cellar was a cool, inviting place. It was full of the closest thing that we had to candy. We weren't going to find any candy around the farm. It really wasn't an option. The closest other place we could go was a small general store about 5 miles down the road. But we couldn't really ride our dirt bikes down there, or even small motorcycles, because it was a very dangerous 2-lane road full of paperwood trucks. These were huge trucks with whole trees on them, bark flying off the back. You didn't want to get too close. They were going fast, too fast. And a lot of them were driven by half-crazy people. And they probably weren't that good at trucks anyway, so the brakes probably didn't work. And if you were out on that road on a motorcycle, you were likely to get killed. We weren't able to sneak into the root cellar. Not very easily anyway. We did it a few times with great risk to ourselves, but not many times, because Nedra, Marie, or Bud, one of them was probably looking out one of those windows. The kitchen looked right over the direction the root cellar was. The front porch looked right over where the root cellar was. I was always fascinated by the root cellar. You know, none of our homes in Alabama had basements. people that live in Birmingham, it's different because they have the mountains. Living on such a mountainous area, the terrain varies greatly, so most of the homes in the northern part of Alabama, well, they all have basements. My grandfather's house in Connecticut, it had a basement. In the north, you need basements for things like oil storage, furnaces, equipment that keeps the house running. You need a place down below that doesn't freeze for these mechanicals. But that's not the truth in the South Gulf region. It doesn't get cold enough to need a basement. People just don't dig them. So this underground, cool room was very interesting to me. Now, thankfully, there was a creek nearby that we played in most days when we were out. We had all kind of games. We had go-karts and motorcycles and hay barns and regular barns and woods. There was a lot to keep you busy. Well, anyway, thankfully we had the creek to play in, and it was pretty cool. You know, the combination of shade and water and the deep banks made it a cool place to be on a hot day. We used to find the hollowed out sections of the wall, the hollowed out sections of the banks, and we would cover those up with tree limbs, and we would make sort of a fort. You could cover those up and then build you a fort up underneath that cover. And if you weren't doing that, you could build a dam and try to stop the water, see how high you could get it to rise. Building a dam, if you've ever done it, is a highly rewarding project because almost immediately after stacking things up, you start to see the results of your labor. You throw some bricks down and some limbs and some mud and some dirt and whatever else you can find, and the water starts rising behind it. And then you make a little more progress, but the force is greater, so it starts to leak. And you realize you need more dam, more material. So it's a great puzzle that evolves as you're doing, a bit like Katamari Damacy. The puzzle changes as you go along. As you get larger in size, the implications of that become larger. And it's just a whole afternoon of fun. So my brother was taken into that root cellar during the Hurricane Frederick in 1979. I was separated from him, and the idea being that if one of us should die, maybe the other would live. I was with my Uncle Randy and my Aunt Lynn, and I was watching it rain fish at one point during that night. I saw a lot of strange stuff. I saw the wind whipping rain sideways, green lights in the sky. I saw a tractor shed that was made out of telephone poles and tin fly away into the trees behind it. This was after all of us became aware that it was rising and falling, and it was gonna go. We were looking at it. In about 10 minutes, we were watching it. The air was getting caught underneath it like it was a scoop. The telephone poles were each buried about 6 foot deep in the ground, but it wasn't deep enough because that shape of the shed, it was open at the front, about 10 feet tall in the rear and maybe 18 foot tall in the front, and about 50 foot long. There were tractors, 4 or 5 tractors, and all the implements that you hook up to the back of the tractors, and trailers and equipment such as that were stored in there. And, you know, it was deep enough on a normal day that on a normal storm, like a thunderstorm, things wouldn't get all that wet because the tractors were deep enough within there. But this storm was different. They had never planned or expected 130 mile an hour wind coming from one direction constantly for an extended period of time. We watched that shed. It was just rising and falling, and you could hear it inside the house because it was just making a huge thunderous noise as this 10 or so telephone poles at the front rising and falling 5 and 6 feet into the ground until finally it just got airborne. It just all took off at once, and it blew into pieces as it hit the trees. It was an amazing sight. My brother Tony, he didn't get to see this because he was down in the root cellar. They had board games down there to entertain them. They'd and set up the card tables and chairs to make it a little more comfortable to ride the hurricane out. But like us, they had went out during the eye of the storm. This is a weird effect of a hurricane. You have this tremendous lead up and things get ever more powerful for hours until it starts blowing really hard, and there might be a couple hours of that. But then there's this period, if the eye comes over you, when it gets really still and things are nice all of a sudden, and you can wander out and just look at the oblivion. Look at everything strange that's happened. So Tony had come up and he had walked over to a barn that was still standing. A lot of the roof was missing, but he walked over to this barn and he's taking a pee up against it. Standing there, he saw a piece of plywood about 3 feet across that had penetrated the cedar boards of the side of the barn. And it was just embedded there, just stuck into the side like a dart. Looked around in the trees, just like us, just saw tin everywhere. Destruction. Trees snapped in half. It's a good idea to have a storm shelter, or a bomb shelter, or a nuclear bomb shelter, a fallout shelter. You can store your vegetables in it. And in the case of a really bad storm, tornado, hurricane, nuclear bomb, what have you, you can go down there and hang out for a while and get some peace and quiet. Maybe you can play a board game with some friends, and got plenty of food around you if you need that. So my grandfather's house in Connecticut, now he had a full basement. The basement door inside in the kitchen had a long staircase down into that dark area. There was a wash basin, furnace, oil tanks, all kinds of cans full of chemicals and old knickknacks from his entire life, and tools and old furniture, unused things tucked here and there, and a ghost. So I was sleeping upstairs and I was afraid of ghosts. I thought that they were going to come down from the attic that I knew was haunted. And this old house was spooky anyway. It seemed to my young mind that obviously this place was haunted. There was a stairway down at the end of the hall behind the door, and that stairway went up to the attic. As soon as you opened it, you just got this smell of oldness, old antique smell, spook-filled. The stairway was black painted wood stairs that sort of twisted up and away out of view. The walls were this weird green color. The light you had to turn on even looked like it would shock you to death. It was this old push button light that had kind of these gaps around it, and you could just imagine if you had any kind of moisture on your finger, you'd probably get electrocuted by using this thing. So I used to push it real fast to try to escape getting shocked by it. So as you went up the stairs, there were these bulbs, these glass bulbs. They called them fire grenades, and they had metal hangers. But in the metal hanger were these glass bulbs about the size of a small bowling ball, but they were filled with a red liquid. And the idea was if you saw a fire, you would throw this at them. Now I found out they were full of a chemical that when the fire hit them would create a gas that would settle down and starve the fire of oxygen. Probably kill you too if you didn't get out of there, but apparently it was a semi-decent way to fight fires long ago. I guess people don't use them anymore because of the death aspect of it. They were hanging here and there up in the attic, different places. There were all kind of stuff that was dangerous to touch up there. There were old lines that used to feed the gas lighting in the upstairs area, and those were kind of exposed, and you felt like you could walk over them, and they probably didn't have gas in them anymore, but maybe they did. It was a spooky place to me as a kid. There were pictures up there, dead relatives and other relations too dead to warrant a spot on the crowded walls below. There were old unwanted things, unwanted clothes, people's time in the military summed up in boxes and lockers, different family members. The smell of untouched memories. The whole house was creepy. had ancient plumbing, weird-looking fixtures, strange radiators and the noises they made. The light fixtures and the fans all seemed to be from a world long dead to my young mind. They seemed like artifacts of another time. I had been sick up there a couple years before, and that was the first time the radiators spoke to me. I was hearing voices from them. The hissing and popping and groaning and the expansion of the metal were conversations in my mind. It was never the same after that. I was always a bit spooked by them, so that's why I was sleeping on the floor in my parents' room that night. I remember being comforted by the smell of the flint, the lighter fluid from my father's Zippo, as he lit a cigarette while reading before he went to bed. So that lasted for a little while, but then the lights went out, and it was quiet in the house. I was just lying on that dark floor, and I started having second thoughts, because it was a lot darker than I had assumed it would be. It was much darker than the room Tony and I would have been. We always kept a small light in the bathroom on, and it kind of leaked through the half-closed door. I had not thought about this. This was an unintended consequence of choosing what I thought would be a safe place. So it wasn't long after that this whisper caught my attention. It seemed like it was coming from the closet. It was calling at me from under the door. There was this evil feeling from the words that were suggested to me at the time that I was going to be in imminent danger if I were to call out to anybody for help. And it just had me paralyzed there. It had me in a catch-22. I was afraid, but I was too afraid to call out as well, because I was in a weird place, and it was all strange to me. The voice was suggestive to me in psychic ways that I was in danger. It was saying, "You are lost. You are alone. Open. 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 Old pan. Old pan. Old pan." I screamed. It took effort, to break out. That feeling that you have sometimes when you're trying to hit somebody during a dream and you just have to break through the dream. That's what this scream felt like through my paralysis. I screamed, and my dad woke up and the lights came on, and I told my parents about the ghost and trouble I was having with them in the closet. I told them about the old pan, and we talked about it briefly, but it was time to go to bed again, and this all ended with some version of there's no ghost, and even if there was, it ain't gonna hurt you. And we all need to go to bed, so just think about something else. You're fine. So I tried hard, to think of anything other than this ghost. But my thoughts kept leading to the conclusion that it would hardly matter anything about that something else if I didn't survive through the night. So I sat there just kind of in fight mode, ready to spring, hunkered down under the covers. It put me in a weird mood, and I guess my dreams were tense, because when I woke up, I was still thinking about it. I was still thinking about old Pan, and somewhere in my dreams I'd become convinced that he was actually down in the basement. And that metal grate over there by the closet was a vent coming from the basement, and that's probably where I was hearing it from. So it was my topic of conversation during breakfast. I got up for breakfast before my parents. I got up as soon as it was 15 minutes to daylight. I was up walking down the stairs, and I went in the kitchen, and there was my grandfather. Thankfully, he was always a very early riser. I knew he would be down there at the small table in the kitchen, drinking his coffee and smoking cigarettes and reading the paper. When he wasn't reading the paper, Granddad was reading a book. He was constantly reading. If you got him started, and it didn't take much to get him started other than a second here or there, he'd tell you all about the Roman Empire and the true meanings of the ancient gods, the nature of philosophy and what it means, the meaning behind old stories. He was great about answering questions, too. As long as you thought your question had some sense to it, he was quick to dismiss it if he thought it was nonsense. He didn't put up with moronic thought whatsoever. He had no time for it. He was a lot more German than my father, being one step closer to the old country. And he was a very serious thinker. He was very rigorous in this pursuit of understanding reality. You know, what's really going on, those questions. So I trusted his opinion a great deal. That's one of the reasons I didn't wait. I just had to get his thoughts on this ghost situation and what I should do about it. We had a donut. That was one nice thing. When Granddad was visiting us, or us visiting him, there was always donuts when I got up. He must have driven or walked down the street really early to the donut shop because they were always there when I woke up. And knowing they were there, I woke up pretty early. He knew just what to do about this whole ghost thing. He told me to have a donut and some milk and tell him all about it. And so I gave him the whole story, from not wanting to sleep in the room to sleeping in my parents' room to the sound under the closet and the paralysis and all of this stuff. He understood it. He said this kind of problem can only be taken care of like all problems. And I was like, what is that, Granddad? And he's like, well, you gotta walk right up to it. You just can't ignore it. You gotta confront it head on. So we went down into the basement. Not just the laundry area or the pool table off to the side of it. By the large wash basin and the machines that always had kind of a weird laundry smell about them. There was an oil tank in the corner that fed the furnace. Past that, some old furniture, and there was an area that coal dust and dirt from an old coal chute that used to come in. So we were looking in the corner with the flashlight. We were looking in between up and down spaces and the ductwork and pipes and old electrics, and just looking for any sign of a haunting. He kept saying, no ghost here. And he told me that whatever it was, it could only hurt me if I was afraid of it. Whatever had scared me didn't have any more power over me than I was willing to give it. He said the most important thing was never lie helpless in a situation like that. He said you've got to act. If that meant coming downstairs and sitting in the kitchen, then so be it. If it meant going in another room and turning the light on and reading, then so be it. He said that's just how it would have to be. He had a great point. I did those things. I'm still very interested in this ghost situation. A few years later, I had read something in the library about Pan being the god of lost children. And sometimes he called out to them. My favorite part of this whole adventure in the basement was my grandfather and I hunting for a ghost down there. The seriousness with which he took it, and the advice, which was rock solid, that he gave me about it. There we were, looking for ghosts early in the morning, before the whole house had woken up. And after that, we went back up and had some more donuts. I had some chocolate milk. He had another cigarette, and all was right with the world.